The recovery room. The notice of sole ownership had been filed with Fulton County at 7:42 that morning. The original deed was in Patricia Hargrove's office, safe. I had done both of those things before I walked into pre-op. Before the anesthesia, before any of it. My brother started talking 3 hours later. He just didn't know in what order the morning had gone. I was 42 years old, lying in a recovery bay at Northside Surgical Center with an IV line taped to the back of my left hand and my hair still damp from the surgical cap. The gown they had dressed me in after the procedure was the color of a bruise. That particular blue-gray that hospitals use because it hides nothing and makes everyone look equally diminished. A nurse named Jerome had checked my vitals 30 minutes earlier and had not come back, which meant I was past the emergency window and into the waiting out phase. The fluorescent light above the bed had a particular gold to it, the kind that makes 11:17 in the morning feel like it could be 3 in the afternoon. My phone sat on the tray table next to a small paper cup of ice chips and a plastic cup of water I had not yet drunk. When the phone buzzed, I did not reach for it immediately. The catheter was still in. Movement cost something. The text was from Aunt Abena. She wrote in the long, careful sentences she had learned from 40 years of teaching secondary school English. Renata, I am at the house to pick up a few things to bring you, and Kwame is here with a key, saying the house is now his to manage while you recover. Something about Mama's final wishes. He is showing a man around the back bedroom right now. He told the man the room is available immediately for $1,650 a month. I'm not sure what is happening, but I wanted you to know. Call me. I read it 3 times. Not because I did not understand it. I understood it perfectly the first time. The house at 114 Briarwood Court was the only significant asset I owned. I had bought it 6 years earlier, at 36, with 12 years of savings from my work as a licensed real estate appraiser. $214,000, paid in full at closing, no mortgage, no lender with a claim on it. I had walked out of the closing with the original deed in a manila folder and had carried it home in my own car. Alone. Kwame had not been there. He was in between things that month, which is what he had been in between for the better part of 4 years. Apartments and couches and my own guest room, taking up space in the lives of people who had not invited him to take it. The back bedroom was the room at the far end of the hall, the one with a window that faced the neighbour's oak tree. I had installed a deadbolt on that door in February. The only key was on my keyring, and my keyring was in a clear plastic bag on the edge of the tray table, next to the phone that had just delivered the news that my brother was in my house, showing that back bedroom to a stranger at 11:17 a.m. on May 15th, while I was still wearing a surgical gown and could not stand without holding the rail. $1,650 a month. He had quoted a specific number. He had brought someone to look. He had said the room was available immediately. I put my phone face down on my lap and looked at the ceiling. The nurse call button was clipped to the bed rail, within reach. I did not press it. Aunt Abena, my mother's older sister, had taught high school English for 40 years before she retired. She had a precise way of speaking and a habit of withholding her opinions until she had examined them from multiple angles. She was not calling me with a demand or an alarm. She was calling me with information, presented in the tone of someone who had witnessed something she did not know how to categorize. That tone, that uncertainty, was the thing that told me how far Kwame had already gone. Aunt Abina did not get uncertain about facts. She got uncertain about intentions, which meant he had told her a story that fit enough of the shape of truth that she could not immediately reject it. My mother had been dead for 5 years. She had not left a will. She had not left final wishes in writing. What she had left was a sentence that Kwame had been quoting to me. And now, it seemed, to other people in our family, whenever he needed something, we take care of each other. Our mother had said it. She had meant it. It was true. It was also true that Kwame had discovered, over the course of the last 4 years, that if he could invoke Mama's voice loud enough, he could make people uncomfortable about refusing him. And if he could make people uncomfortable about refusing him, he could make them uncomfortable about asking questions either. I had learned that lesson in 2023, when he had asked me for $8,200 because his lease had fallen apart again and he had nowhere to go. I had given him the money without a contract, without a promissory note, without any official record of a loan. I had given it to him because he had sat at my kitchen table and said my mother's name, and because I did not want to be the sibling who attached conditions to family love. He had not repaid it. We had not spoken about it since. He had learned that the strategy worked. I had learned something else. I had learned that I was easier to move than I had thought. But that was not what the papers sitting in Patricia Hargrove's office safe were about. I reached for the water cup. The catheter pinched as I shifted my weight. I drank the water slowly and looked out the window of the recovery bay. A view of the parking lot, and beyond it, the tree line that marked the edge of Northside's campus. The day was overcast. It was the kind of afternoon where everything outside looked like a photograph of itself. I thought about the filing at 7:42 a.m. I thought about the deed in the safe deposit box in Patricia's office. I thought about the sequence of the morning, which was the only thing that mattered now. He had a key. I was not sure when he had copied it, but it must have been during one of his earlier visits, for months ago, when he still thought he could live here without asking. I had changed the locks on the front door 3 years earlier, after he had let himself in to use the shower during a period when he was homeless and had not bothered to let me know he was coming. But I had not changed the lock on the back patio door. I had not thought he would copy a key. I had thought that if he needed access, he would ask me. It had taken me a very long time to understand the difference between what someone says they want and what they actually intend to do. The house was empty, except for him. Luz, my neighbour and closest friend, was at work. I thought Aunt Abena would not have gone far. She had said she was there to pick up a few things to bring to me. But if Kwame was already showing the room to a prospective tenant, then Aunt Abena had not stopped him, and she had not called me with alarm, which meant she had decided it was not her place to stop him. None of that mattered. What mattered was that at 7:42 that morning, before Kwame knew I was having surgery, before he had called Aunt Abena, before he had walked a stranger through my back bedroom, I had filed a notice of sole ownership with Fulton County. And at 9:05 a.m., 40 minutes after I had done that filing, I had walked the original deed into Patricia Hargrove's office, signed it over to her safe deposit care, and had it logged in her intake system. I had done those things while my mind was clear, while no one could later claim I was sedated or medicated or confused from anesthesia. I had done them before I walked into pre-op. The timestamps would prove it. I was not angry yet. What I felt was closer to a particular kind of stillness. The kind that comes when you have already played out the conversation that is about to happen, and you know exactly how it will go, and you know that the other person does not yet understand that it is already over. Aunt Abena had not told me I had made a mistake. She had told me what was happening, framed as a question mark. She had left space for me to panic, to tell her that, yes, Kwame was authorized to be there. Yes, he could show the room. Yes, I had asked him to manage things. She had left space for me to be a confused woman recovering from surgery, sedated and not thinking clearly, and to retroactively authorize what he was already doing. I put my phone face up on the tray table. I looked at the clock. 11:17. Kwame was in my house. The prospective tenant was in my house. Aunt Abena was in my house. They were all in the back bedroom right now, looking at the locked door, trying to figure out why a door in the house had a deadbolt on it. And in Patricia Hargrove's office, safe downtown, the original deed was sitting next to the intake log, time-stamped 9:05 a.m., with Renata Adwoa Osi's name on the intake sheet, and her alone. Before I tell you what happened when Kwame figured out what I had already done, before the cease and desist, before the family saw the documents, before he realized the sequence had gone against him, I need you to understand something. I was not a woman in distress. I was not lying there helpless, waiting for someone to rescue me from what my brother was doing. I was lying there knowing exactly what I had already done, waiting to see how long it would take him to realize he had lost. I reached for my phone. My hand was steady. The house, the brother, the history. I bought 114 Briarwood Court when I was 36 years old. It took me 12 years to save the money. Every commission I earned as a licensed real estate appraiser. Every dollar above what I needed to spend on rent and groceries, and the 2007 Honda Civic with the cracked side mirror that got me between properties. I tracked it in a spreadsheet. I knew the total to the penny, $214,000. I paid it in full at closing on a morning in May. 6 years ago, in a glass-walled office downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and the particular cold of places where people sign their names to important things. No mortgage, no lender, no one else's name on the deed. Kwame was not at the closing. He was in between things that month. In between a job that had ended and a job he had not found. In between an arrangement with a friend that was not quite working, and the next arrangement he had not yet lined up. That was his permanent address. The space between. Our mother was still alive then. She had told him I was buying the house. She had asked him if he wanted to be there. He said maybe. And then he did not show up. 6 years later, he would claim the house was family property. What he meant, though he did not say it in so many words at the beginning, was that the house belonged to him, not through law, not through contribution, but through need, through circumstance, through the accident of being born into a family where my success was supposed to function as structural support for his instability. He was building that narrative slowly, piece by piece, in conversations with Aunt Abina and Uncle Raymond, in the way he had let himself in through the back door without asking, in the way he spoke to prospective tenants as if he owned the place. But the sentence that would let him claim it all, the one that would let him stand in my kitchen and say Mama's name and have it work like a key, that came in 2023. First came the 4 years of unstable housing. After our mother died in 2019, Kwame was living in a friend's spare room in East Atlanta. He paid no rent. He did no work in the house. The understanding, stated once and then never mentioned again, was that the arrangement was temporary. He was 37 years old. He had no fixed address, no fixed employer, no job title that appeared the same way twice when he described it to different people. He called himself a property consultant, which meant that he occasionally helped friends think about whether they should buy or sell homes. This generated opinions but not income. He had a car that broke down frequently. He had a phone bill that I eventually learned he was not paying himself, that someone else was paying, that he did not acknowledge with gratitude, but instead treated as something he was owed. By the beginning of 2020, the friend had asked him to leave. He moved to another friend's house, Northwest Side, near the Chattahoochee. The arrangement was also temporary, also unpaid, also destined to end. He stayed there for 3 months, then 4. Then in early 2021, the friend's patience ran out. By that point, Kwame had seemed to accept that his entire housing future would consist of 2 to 4 month cycles. Move in, take up space without contributing. Wait for the person to reach their limit. Move to the next couch or spare room or friend who had not yet learned to say no. He carried a duffel bag. He carried a story about how each arrangement had failed through circumstances beyond his control. The friend's wife had gotten pregnant. The friend's job had relocated. The roommate's mother was moving in. What he did not carry was gratitude, or acknowledgement of burden, or any apparent awareness that he was being asked to leave because he had worn out his welcome. That was when he began showing up at my house more frequently, not as a guest making an arrangement, not as a nephew or brother who was asking permission. He showed up as someone who had decided that my guest room was available to him when the current arrangement fell apart. I had not invited this. I had not said yes, but I had also not said no. And in our family, that silence had always been the opening he was looking for. Silence read as permission. Hesitation read as room to negotiate. Compassion read as infinite. He was the one who brought up the mortgage-free status of the house when talking to other people. Not to celebrate my accomplishment. Not from pride in what his sister had built, but to establish a fact, to make the house knowable as a resource. The house was valuable. It was unencumbered, and it existed in a state that made it very simple for someone to insert himself into it. Oh, our mother had known. I had mentioned it to her at the closing. A moment of pride I immediately regretted once I understood it would become shared property of the family conversation. She had told him, probably during one of the periods when he was in between things, and she was still hoping his instability was temporary, a phase he would grow out of. He had held onto that information the way a person holds onto a map they might need someday. By the time he started spending 3 days a week at my house, he had built a very clear picture of what the absence of a mortgage meant. It meant the house was available, unguarded. waiting for him to reorganize it into his life. The sentence that would give him everything came in 2023. It was a Thursday evening. I had made dinner, rice and fish. Nothing complicated. He had texted earlier asking if he could come eat, and I had said yes. And he had arrived at 6:15 and had sat at the kitchen table while I finished cooking. The apartment he had been subletting in Midtown was falling apart. The person whose name was on the lease had gotten an eviction notice. And everyone on the lease, including Kwame, had to leave. He had been there for 5 months. That had been his longest single arrangement in 3 years. Now he had nowhere to go. And he had come to me, as he always did, to be the one who fixed it. He did not ask for a place to stay. He did not say, "I need help." He did not make the request as a question. Instead, he sat at my table and he said, "Mama always said we take care of each other." I had stopped stirring the rice. I knew what was coming. I knew the exact shape of the sentence before he finished it. Mama had said it. She had said it to both of us, many times, from a place of genuine meaning. We do take care of each other. That is a true thing. That is a real value, woven into the fabric of how we had been raised. But I also understood, standing at the stove with the rice still warm in the pot, that he had weaponized that sentence. He had taken something true and had turned it into a key. Invoking Mama's voice, invoking her values, had become his way of closing the conversation before it could truly open. If I said no, I would not just be saying no to him. I would be saying no to her memory, to her principles, to the thing that had bound us together when she was alive. "How much?" I said. $8,200. I'll pay it back. Renata, I promise. I wrote a check the next morning. I did not ask him to sign a promissory note. I did not ask when he would pay it back. I did not attach terms or conditions or any record that would later allow me to say, this was a loan, not a gift. I was trying to be the sister he was describing, the one who took care of family without conditions, who did not make people ashamed for needing help, who believed that being needed by family was the same thing as being valued by family. He did not pay it back. He made no attempt to pay it back. We did not mention it again after that Thursday dinner. He had moved into my guest room by the following week. He said it was temporary. He said he was looking for his own place. He said that by summer, something would come through. Summer came. He was still in the guest room. Then came fall, then winter, then spring again. A year, 18 months, nearly 2 years. Temporary is a very flexible word in a family. If you say it often enough, no one ever asks you to leave. By early 2024, he had stopped knocking. He had stopped asking. He had a key. I never knew exactly when he copied it. But one day, I realized that he could let himself in without calling, without announcing himself, without waiting for permission. He had the alarm code because I had given it to him early on when the first arrangement fell apart, and I was still believing that the access I was providing was temporary, a bridge to the next thing. He knew where I kept the checkbook. He knew my mother's maiden name, which I used as the password to my email. He knew the layout of the house well enough that he could walk a stranger through it without hesitation, could describe the dimensions of a room he did not own, could quote a rental price he had chosen. What I had not understood what I should have named plainly in 2023 when I wrote that check was that generosity without boundaries teaches people to expect it. It trains them to believe that the next time they invoke your mother's voice, you will fold just as quickly. It is how you build a foundation where someone can stand and claim that the house you paid for alone is actually family property. And they are simply the one who will manage it, protect it, rent out its rooms while you are lying in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. He learned that lesson well. I learned it differently, but I learned it before he did. And that made all the difference. The surgery morning, 7:42 a.m. The morning of the surgery, I woke at 5:30 a.m. The house was still dark. The alarm was set for 5:45, but I was already awake, which meant I had not slept well, which meant I had been thinking about it all night. About Kwame, about the house, about what Luce had said 2 weeks earlier when she came over with coffee and mentioned, almost casually, that she had seen his car parked on Briarwood Court twice in 1 week. He was just sitting there, Luce had said, both times on a Tuesday, both times maybe 20 minutes. I didn't see him go inside, but his car was in the driveway. I had not told him about the surgery. Only Aunt Abena knew, because I needed her to arrange a ride home. Only Patricia Hargrove knew, my attorney from the boundary dispute 2 years earlier. And now, Kwame was parking in my driveway on days when he thought I was at work, visiting a house he did not own, at a time when I had not invited him. At 5:45, I got out of bed. I showered. I did the things the surgical centre had instructed. No food after midnight. No makeup. No jewellery. No nail polish. I dressed in comfortable clothes, grey pants, a button-up shirt that would be easy to remove. Then I went to the kitchen and made coffee. The fireproof home safe was in the closet off the dining room. Behind the winter coats and next to the box of tax returns, I kept more out of habit than necessity. Inside were insurance documents, my mother's gold earrings that I wore once a year, and the original deed to 114 Briarwood Court. I had not thought about that deed very much in the 6 years since I had signed it at closing. It was a document I owned, a piece of paper with official seals and my signature, recording a transaction that had already happened. But in the last 2 weeks, after Luce mentioned Kwame's car, I had taken it out and looked at it 3 times, as if reading it again would confirm something I already knew. At 6:55 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table with the deed, my laptop, and Patricia Hargrove's home number written on a piece of scrap paper. The coffee was still warm. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten. That moment before dawn, when the dark becomes blue-grey. I had scheduled this surgery 6 weeks ago. I had told my brother nothing about it. And now, 6 years after I had paid for this house in full, I was sitting at my kitchen table 45 minutes before I was supposed to check in for anesthesia, about to make a phone call that would change the trajectory of everything that was about to happen. I called Patricia at home. It was not yet 7 a.m. She answered on the 3rd ring. Patricia, it's Renata Osei. Good morning. What's wrong? I need to file a notice of sole ownership with Fulton County this morning. I need to do it before 10:30 a.m. and I need to deliver the original deed to your office safe before surgery. She did not ask why. That was the thing I appreciated about Patricia. She did not need a story. She needed information and a deadline. I can file it electronically from the office at 7:30, she said. That will get it into the county system with a timestamp. You bring me the original deed at 8:45. I'll have it in the safe deposit box before 9:10. The anesthesia starts at 10:30. You'll make it. Email me the deed right now. Take a photo if you need to. I took a photograph of the deed as it lay on my kitchen table. The seal of Fulton County visible in the corner. My signature at the bottom. The date. May 19th, 2020. I emailed it to Patricia. Then I sat with my coffee and did not think about Kwame. I did not spin scenarios about what he might be planning. I was not panicking. I was sequencing. There is a difference. At 7:15 a.m., I called the surgical center to confirm check-in time. The woman who answered had my chart in front of her. Laparoscopic procedure. Pre-op at 10:30. Estimated surgery time, 45 minutes to 1 hour. Expected discharge time, 2 to 3 p.m. the same day. She read it all in a tone that made it sound routine, ordinary, the kind of thing that happened to someone every day. I'll be there at 10:15, I said. At 7:42 a.m., Patricia Hargrove emailed me. The notice of sole ownership had been filed with Fulton County Records. The case number was included. The timestamp was exact. 7:42 a.m., May 15th, 2026. The filing would be impossible to challenge or dispute. I had filed it 4 hours and 48 minutes before I walked into pre-op. I had filed it in full mental capacity, with my own 2 hands, in my own kitchen, while still drinking my first cup of coffee. I printed the confirmation email. I placed it in a folder with the deed photograph and the bank statements. Then I put the original deed in a manila envelope and left the house. The drive to Patricia's office on Peachtree Street took 18 minutes. Traffic was light at 8:35 on a Tuesday morning. The office building was the kind that had been renovated several times since the 1970s. All glass and steel now. All sharp angles and expensive lighting. Patricia was waiting by the reception desk when the elevator doors opened on the 4th floor. She was a woman in her early 50s with the exact posture of someone who had spent 2 decades reading property documents and winning cases. She did not waste time. You look steady, she said. I am steady, I said. We went into her office. She had the intake form already open on her computer, a document titled Safe Deposit Care Agreement. She took the original deed from me. She read through it line by line. The legal description of the property, the recording number, the date of the transaction, my name. Then she stood and walked to the safe deposit room, which was a smaller room with a metal door, and the kind of lock that required 2 keys. I watched her place the deed into a metal box. I heard the lock click closed. When she returned to her desk, she opened a leather-bound ledger. Sign here, Icon, she said. Name, date, time. This documents everything. I signed. The intake log read, 9:05 a.m., May 15th, 2026. Below my signature, Patricia's office manager had written in neat handwriting, Original deed, property at 114 Briarwood Court, NW, Atlanta, Georgia 30318. Sole owner of record, Renata Adwoa Osei. Delivered for safekeeping and legal protection. No one touches that without a court order, Patricia said. Your brother can claim whatever he wants. It doesn't matter. The original is locked, dated, and witnessed. The filing is time-stamped in the county system. You are protected. I nodded. 9 hours and 5 minutes had passed since I filed the notice. In less than 9 hours, Kwame would tell Aunt Abena that the house was now his to manage. But that would happen after. What mattered now was the timestamp. I left her office at 9:15 a.m. The drive to Northside Surgical Centre took 35 minutes. I arrived at 10:15, checked in at reception, and was called back to pre-op at 10:25. The nurse, a man named Jerome with steady hands, placed an IVAR line in the back of my left hand. The needle went in without resistance. The saline started running. He wrote my name on a whiteboard and asked me to verify each piece of information. Date of birth, procedure, emergency contact. Aunt Abena Osei, I said, and gave him the phone number. The surgical nurse came in at 10:27. She asked the same questions. She had me sign a consent form. She told me the anesthesiologist would be by shortly. She asked if I had any questions. I did not. At 10:29, the anesthesiologist came in wearing a surgical mask. He said my name. He told me to count backward from 100. I started counting. 99. 98. I remember thinking that the filing was already in the system. The deed was already in the safe. The record existed. Kwame had no idea what had already happened before he moved. 97. 96. I got to 91. And then the darkness came. When I woke, the recovery nurse was checking my blood pressure, and my phone was vibrating on the tray table next to me. A text from Aunt Abena, received at 11:17 a.m. Renata, I am at the house to pick up a few things for you, and Kwame is here with a key, saying he is managing the house while you recover. Something about Mama's final wishes. He is showing a man through the back bedroom. He said 1,650 a month. I am not sure what is happening. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady. The notice had been filed at 7:42 a.m. The deed was in Patricia Hargrove's safe. And my brother had no idea that both of those things had already happened before he turned the key in my back door. The text from Aunt Abena. The text from Aunt Abena arrived at 11:17 a.m. I was still in the recovery bay at Northside Surgical Centre, the surgical gown still on under a thin hospital blanket, the catheter still in place, the IV line still taped to the back of my left hand with white surgical tape. The nurse, Jerome, a man in his late 30s with the kind of calm that comes from having done this 1,000 times, had checked my blood pressure and vitals 10 minutes earlier. He had asked me how I was feeling. I had told him I felt fine, which was true. I felt distant from my body, which is what anesthesia does. It removes you for a time, and then it brings you back slowly. So you are conscious before you are entirely present. My phone was on the tray table next to a small paper cup of ice chips and a container of apple juice I had not yet touched. The recovery bay curtain was drawn halfway. I could hear someone in the adjacent bay being asked by their nurse to cough, and the sound of a television somewhere down the hallway. Muted but persistent. Everything smelled like antiseptic and the particular warmth of a place where bodies are being carefully monitored. The text from Aunt Abena read, Renata, I am at the house to pick up a few things to bring you, and Kwame is here with a key, saying the house is now his to manage while you recover. Something about Mama's final wishes. He is showing a man around the back bedroom right now. He told the man the room is available immediately for $1,650 a month. I am not sure what is happening, but I wanted you to know. Call me. I read it 3 times, not because I did not understand it. I understood it perfectly the first time. I read it 3 times because I was trying to calculate how fast he had moved. The surgical center check-in was 10:30. The procedure took 45 minutes. I had been in recovery for roughly 30 minutes when the text arrived. That meant Kwame had shown up at 114 Briarwood Court sometime between 10 and 11 a.m., had let himself in with a copied key, had called Aunt Abena or waited for her to arrive, and had walked a stranger through my house, describing rental rates for a room he did not own, citing Mama's final wishes as justification, all before I had fully regained consciousness. He had moved faster than I had anticipated. I had thought he would wait a few days. I had thought he would let me come home first, establish his narrative quietly, perhaps catch me off guard with the declaration that he was managing the property. But he was there now, right now, with a prospective tenant, with a key that should not have existed, with the absolute confidence that I was sedated and incapable of response, that any claim I might make would be the confusion of a woman recovering from surgery, that he had moved fast enough to establish facts on the ground. I put my phone face down on the tray table for a moment. I looked at the IV line in my hand. Then I picked the phone up again and dialed Patricia Hargrove's office number. She answered on the second ring. I could hear the sound of her office in the background. Papers, a keyboard. The kind of quiet productivity of a law firm at midday. He moved faster than I expected, I said. My voice was low, the kind of low you use when you are in a shared space, and you do not want other people to hear what you are saying. Send the letter. Sending now, Patricia said. No surprise, no alarm, just logistics. Email first, then certified mail. I'm copying Crestwood Residential, and I'm adding your family members. Who should I address? Aunt Abena Osei, Theo Osei, Raymond Osei. Copy all 3. Done? The email is going out in 30 seconds. The filing timestamp is in the first document, 7:42 a.m. The deed intake log is attached by 9:05 a.m. He can tell every person he knows whatever story he wants. It doesn't matter. The record is solid. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet. This is what you paid me to be ready for. I'm ready. I hung up. The curtain between my bay and the patient to the right was drawn halfway, and I could see the edge of another bed, another IV stand, another person in another surgical gown waiting for recovery to progress. Everything was routine. Everything was proceeding according to protocol. But somewhere in downtown Atlanta, in Patricia Hargrove's office, emails were being sent. Attached to those emails were documents with timestamps, with official seals, with the full weight of county records behind them. Kwame had a key and a prospective tenant. I had the filing at 7:42 a.m. and the deed intake at 9:05 a.m. Those were not equal things. I texted Luce. He's there. Don't let him into the back bedroom. The key is with me. Luz Delgado had lived next door to me for 3 years. She was 39 years old, a dental hygienist, the woman who had walked over one evening with coffee when I was struggling with a repair to the front fence. The woman who had volunteered to help paint the guest bedroom last summer. The woman who had watched Kwame's car sit in my driveway twice in 1 week and had mentioned it to me because she thought something was wrong. She was also the woman who had the afternoon off on this particular Tuesday because a patient had cancelled. And when I texted her, she responded within 4 minutes. "I'm heading over now. I'll be there in 8 minutes. Jerome came back to check my vitals again. Blood pressure stable. Heart rate stable. The surgical site was healing as expected. The anesthesia was wearing off at the correct rate. Well, he did not ask me why I was making phone calls, why I was texting, why my face was so still, so controlled. He simply recorded the numbers on the chart and moved to the next patient. I did not call Kwame. Not yet. I did not call Aunt Abena back immediately, either. I did something I had been trained by the family to do when conflict arose. I waited. I let the situation develop. I gave other people time to understand what was happening on their own, so I would not have to be the one who named it. Silence, in my family, was a way of saying, figure it out yourself. But I was not silent about everything. I texted Luz again. Patricia Hargrove is sending documents to Aunt Abena, Theo, and Uncle Raymond. They should arrive by 2 p.m. They show I filed ownership notice this morning at 7:42 a.m. and delivered the deed to her safe at 9:05 a.m. Make sure Kwame understands that the house is documented as mine. Luz responded, Got it. He's still here. He looks like he's trying to get into the back bedroom again. Your neighbor to the left came over and told him he needed to leave the property. I did not know the neighbor to the left well. His name was Thomas. He had lived there for 5 years and kept mostly to himself. But apparently, Thomas had seen Kwame and a stranger at my front door, had observed Kwame trying the handle of the back bedroom door, and had decided this was something worth addressing. For the neighbor I barely knew was now protecting my house, while I was in a recovery bay with an IV line in my hand. At 12:15 p.m., Aunt Abena called me back. Her voice carried the weight of uncertainty, the particular careful tone of someone who is trying to be fair, trying to see all sides, trying not to choose before she fully understands. Renata, she said, Kwame said you asked him to look after things while you recovered. He said Mama would have wanted family to take care of family. He's been very helpful about explaining the house, about property management. He knows a lot about these things. I'm wondering if maybe there's something to what he's saying. Maybe this is what you need right now. Someone to manage things while you heal. What she was asking me, without quite asking it directly, was whether her nephew's need for housing and purpose outweighed my ownership of the house. What she was asking was whether generosity toward family required me to surrender control of my own property while I was unable to defend it physically. What she was asking was whether I was being unreasonable by not sharing. I did not answer her question. Instead, I asked a different one. Auntie, did you receive an email from a lawyer named Patricia Hargrove? No, not yet. Why would a lawyer be emailing me? She will. Read it when it arrives. Read all of it. The filing, the deed, the letter. All of it. Renata, I don't understand what's happening. Is something wrong? You will understand when you read the documents, I said. I hung up. The documents had not arrived yet. Patricia Hargrove had told me she was sending them. But she had also understood something about timing. Giving Kwame a few hours to understand what had happened before the family saw the proof would be more effective than dumping everything at once. Let him sit with the knowledge that the filing had been completed before he arrived. Let him understand, in his own time, that the timeline was against him. Then, when the family received their copies, they would already know from Kwame's reaction that something significant had occurred. Until those documents arrived in their inboxes, Aunt Abena would sit in the uncertainty of not knowing whose version to believe. Kwame's story was simpler. Kwame was there, physically present, warm, helpful. Kwame had invoked Mama, had used the sentence that had worked so well in 2023, the sentence that had earned him $8,200 and a place to live without paying rent. And Renata was lying in a hospital bed, still wearing a surgical gown, with a catheter in place, medicated, unable to explain herself. Her voice low and somewhat uncertain because that is what happens to people recovering from anesthesia. But the documents were coming. The filing at 7:42 a.m. was official, time-stamped, recorded with Fulton County. The deed intake at 9:05 a.m. was witnessed, signed, placed in a locked safe. The notice of sole ownership was legal document, not a story Renata had told while confused. And once Aunt Abena read those documents, she would understand that I had acted before Kwame had moved, that I had prepared for this exact moment, that the entire foundation of his claim rested on the assumption that I was helpless. There was nothing to what he was saying, but I understood why she asked. She had only heard one version. The documents hadn't arrived yet. I lay back against the pillow in the recovery bay and closed my eyes. And I listened to the sound of the hospital moving around me. Nurses calling to each other. Machines beeping in other bays. The distant sound of the television someone was still watching. The IV line was in my hand. The catheter was in place. I could not stand up. I could not drive. I could not go home. But I had already won. I just had to wait for everyone else to understand it. What Kwame was actually doing. Luz Delgado saw it all from her kitchen window. She was standing at her sink on that Tuesday morning, washing the breakfast dishes from a meal she had eaten alone because a patient had cancelled, and she had come home earlier than expected. Her kitchen window faced my backyard and the side of my house. The angle perfect for seeing anyone who came up the driveway or moved across the front porch. Luz was not someone who spent her day watching other people's homes. But she had a habit of noticing things. A car she did not recognize, a delivery truck, a person who did not belong. And she had reason to be paying attention that morning because I had texted her and I had asked her to come. But Luz had already seen him before my text arrived. Kwame had arrived at 114 Briarwood Court at approximately 9:50 a.m. Luz saw his car, a 2015 Nissan Altima, with a smudged passenger window and a check engine light that had been on for at least 3 months, pull into the driveway. She watched him get out. She watched him walk to the back patio door, the one that faces the neighbor's yard, the one that was not locked because I had not thought I needed to lock it, because I had not anticipated that my brother would copy the key. she watched him insert a key into that lock. Not a key I'd given him recently. Not a key I had authorized him to possess. A key he must have copied during one of his earlier visits. The kind of thing that happens quietly, over time, when someone is comfortable enough in your house to take what they need without asking permission. Once he was inside, Luce saw nothing for approximately 10 minutes. Then she saw him at the front windows, phone in hand, pacing. She could not hear what he was saying, but she could see the shape of his body, the way he was gesturing, the intensity of his focus. He was explaining something to someone. He was making a case. He was calling people from inside my house and telling them stories about what he had authority to do there, what Kwame had actually been doing, what he had been setting in motion in the days and hours before that Tuesday morning, was building infrastructure for a claim. 4 days earlier, on Friday, May 12th, at approximately 2:30 p.m., Kwame had contacted Crestwood Residential, a property management company that handles rental placements and tenant screening for single-family homes across Atlanta and rural Georgia. The method of contact would never be entirely clear. Whether he had called the office, emailed a sales representative, or filled out an intake form on their website. But the result was identical. He had provided them with the address of 114 Briarwood Court Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia 30318. On the intake form, in the field marked Owner of Record, he had written his own name, Kwame Ernest Osei. Not manager, not agent. Owner. He had described the property in the terms that would make it attractive to renters. A single-family home in a residential neighborhood. A back bedroom available for immediate or near immediate occupancy. Utilities included. Move-in ready. Lied. He had specified the monthly rental rate. $1,650. Crestwood Residential had assigned him a case number. CR-2026-47821. They had told him they would begin circulating the listing to their database of prospective tenants. They had told him they expected interest within 3 to 5 business days. No one at Crestwood Residential had verified his ownership. No one had pulled the official deed from Fulton County records. No one had done a title search. Crestwood Residential was a property management company, not a law firm, and they operated on the assumption that if someone called them and said they owned a property, that person owned it. It was an assumption Kwame was betting everything on. It was an assumption that would cost him. On Tuesday morning, at 10:05 a.m., Kwame called Aunt Abena from inside my house. His voice, according to what Aunt Abena would later recount to me, was calm, reasonable, helpful. "Auntie, it's Kwame. I'm at Renata's house. She asked me to look after things while she's recovering from surgery. She didn't want to worry about the property while she's healing. I'm just checking on things, making sure everything is secure." This was a lie. I had not asked him to look after anything. I had not asked him to come to the house. I had not given him permission to be there. And more importantly, I had not given him permission to represent himself as someone acting on my behalf. But look after things is a phrase that means almost nothing and almost everything simultaneously. And it is vague enough to encompass any activity. Managing the house, organizing the rooms, showing people through the space, renting out bedrooms, and yet specific enough to sound like a request, a task, an assignment given by someone with authority. Mama would have wanted us to take care of each other during times like this. Kwame said, I'm just making sure nothing falls through the cracks. Aunt Abina did not challenge him. She believed him. Or more precisely, she did not disbelieve him. She did not have information that contradicted what he was saying. She had only his voice, his tone, his invocation of our mother's memory and her values. And that was enough. He then called Cousin Theo, the son of Uncle Raymond, the nephew who had his own family and his own life, and who did not have time to verify stories, and told him a variant of the same narrative. Renata asked me to manage the house while she recovers. I'm just taking some things off her plate. And then he called Uncle Raymond himself and said, I'm at Renata's place. She wanted someone to keep an eye on things during recovery. I'm going to be here most of the day. By 10:30 a.m., 3 family members had been called by Kwame and told in his own voice from inside my house that I had authorized him to manage my property while I was incapacitated. At that exact same moment, I was checking into the surgical center. I was providing my name and my date of birth to a nurse with a clipboard. I was signing consent forms. I was being led to the pre-op bay by a woman named Jennifer, who had walked people through this same hallway hundreds of times and who knew exactly how to position me on the bed. Set to place the IV, when to explain what would happen next. I had no idea that Kwame was already in my house, already on the telephone, already rewriting the narrative of what was happening and why he was there. By 10:35 a.m., Kwame had walked through the entire house and had identified his target, the back bedroom. It was the room I had locked with the deadbolt in February, months before the surgery. The room that had been sealed off since then. The lock on that door was a physical obstacle, a visible problem that he could not explain away as easily as he needed to. He could not say the room was in between tenants. He could not say it was being renovated. He could not say it was unavailable due to a technical issue. There was a deadbolt on the door, and he did not have the key. And that was a fact he could not alter by simply telling a better story. So he altered the story instead. When the prospective tenant arrived at the front door, a man named Darius M., age 34, employed as a shift supervisor at a distribution center, looking for a room in a residential neighborhood, referred to Kwame by Crestwood Residential's algorithm. Kwame was already prepared. He walked Darius through the living room. He showed him the kitchen. He showed him the common areas. He pointed out the yard, the parking space, the proximity to public transportation. Everything was pleasant. Everything was reasonable. Everything was presented as a property that was stable, available, and ready to occupy. And then they came to the back bedroom. Kwame tried the handle. The door did not open. The deadbolt held. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that appears when someone realizes that a story they were about to tell has been interrupted by reality. And then Kwame spoke. "We're clearing out the storage," he said. "Should be ready in 2 weeks. Just need time to move some things." What he did not say, what he very carefully did not say was, "My sister locked this door because she does not want anyone in this room." He did not say, "I do not own this house, so I cannot unlock this door for you." He did not say, I am showing you a room that I have no actual authority to give you." He did not say any of those things. He said it was storage. He said clearing out was already in progress. He said 2 weeks. He said it in the tone of someone discussing a minor logistics problem, as if a locked bedroom door was merely an inconvenience, as if the clearing out of storage was already scheduled, as if he had the authority to make that door open whenever he decided to. He quoted Darius a price, $1,650 per month. He said the room would be available within 2 weeks. He said utilities were included. He asked if Darius was interested in moving forward with an application. Darius, according to what would later be recorded in the intake notes that Crestwood Residential kept in their system, expressed interest. He wanted to move forward. He wanted to proceed with the application process. He believed, based on what Kwame had told him, that he could have this room, in this house, for $1,650 a month, beginning within 2 weeks. Kwame took down Darius's information. He told him he would be in touch. What? He told him the application process was straightforward. He told him everything would be taken care of. Then he walked Darius back to the front door. Luz watched this from her kitchen window. She watched Kwame and Darius emerge from inside my house. She watched them stand on the front porch. The porch I had pressure washed the previous summer. The porch where I had sat in the spring evening just days earlier, drinking iced tea and thinking about surgery. She watched Kwame extend his hand to Darius. She watched them shake hands. The handshake was the gesture of 2 people concluding a transaction. It was the gesture of someone confident in what he had just promised, convinced that what he had said was true, certain that the next 2 weeks would proceed according to the plan he had outlined. This was happening at 10:47 a.m., 11 miles away, at Northside Surgical Center. The anesthesiologist was counting down the medication dosage into my IV line. "You should feel very relaxed right now," he was saying. "Just keep counting backward. You're doing great." I had reached 94. The darkness was coming. Kwame had a key. He had a story about Mama's final wishes, about family taking care of family, about my explicit request that he manage the house while I recovered. He had already contacted a property management company and given them false information about his ownership. He had already listed the house as his property in their database. He had already arranged a showing. He had already quoted a rental rate. He had already promised a prospective tenant occupancy within 2 weeks. He had already shaken that tenant's hand on the front porch as if the deal was done, as if the paperwork was merely a formality, as if the only thing remaining was time passing. What he did not have was the one thing that actually decides who owns a house in the state of Georgia. He did not have the deed. He did not have the filing. He did not have the notice of sole ownership. Time-stamped at 7:42 a.m. that morning. Submitted to Fulton County 4 hours before he let himself into my house with a copied key. He did not have the intake log from Patricia Hargrove's office. Time-stamped at 9:05 a.m., documenting the delivery of the original deed to a locked safe deposit box. What he did not know was that the woman he was lying about, the woman he was claiming had asked him to manage the property, had already protected the property from him before he ever copied that key. She had protected it before he ever made contact with Crestwood Residential. She had protected it before he ever dialed Aunt Abina's number. She had protected it at 7:42 in the morning, before he even woke up, before he had any idea what was about to happen. But he would find out. Very soon, he would find out exactly how prepared she had been. She's confused from the anesthesia. Luz arrived at 114 Briarwood Court at 11:08 a.m. She parked her car in my driveway deliberately, not in a guest spot, but in the center, claiming the space with the weight of her presence. She walked to the front door and knocked. Kwame answered. The door opened, and she could see it in his face immediately. The moment he understood that something had shifted, that the woman he had lied about was not sedated and incapable after all, that someone on the outside had been contacted. And that person was standing on the porch, telling him that the game had changed. "Renata called me," Luz said. Her voice was level. "She knows you're here. She knows about the showing. She wants you to leave." Kwame did not leave. What he did instead was worse than if he had simply walked away. He understood, in that moment, that his position in the house was contested, that I was conscious and aware that the foundation of his entire claim, that I had asked him to manage the property while I recovered, might not hold up if I was coherent enough to contradict it directly. So he pivoted. He did what had worked before. He invoked our mother's memory, and he did it over the phone. Right. And he did it in a way that positioned him as the rational adult, while I became the unreliable patient. At 11:23 a.m., while I was still in the recovery bay at Northside Surgical Center, with the surgical gown beneath the hospital blanket and the IV line running saline into the back of my left hand, Kwame called Aunt Abina back. "Auntie, I need to talk to you about something. Renata just called Luz, and apparently Renata is upset about me being here at the house. But I'm concerned that she's not thinking clearly right now. The anesthesia, you know how it works. It affects judgment. People say things when they're medicated that they wouldn't say when they're alert. I think she's confused about what we discussed before the surgery. I know she asked me to look after things. I know that's what she wanted. But right now, she's in recovery, and the medication is still in her system. And I don't think we should be taking her word as final when she's in this state." Aunt Abina listened. She did not immediately hang up. She did not immediately say, "No." "Kwame, your sister is right. What she did was something far more useful to him." She listened. And in listening, she wavered. Kwame continued. He was intelligent, and he was desperate, and he had nothing left to lose, which meant he was dangerous in the way that only intelligent, desperate people can be. Mama would not have wanted us to make decisions about family property when one family member is medicated and confused, he said. "I'm not saying Renata is lying about what she's feeling right now. I'm saying she's not herself. The anesthesia makes you not yourself. We need to be the adults in this situation. We need to be the ones making sound decisions while she recovers. That's what family does. That's what Mama taught us to do." And Aunt Abina, who had already wavered once after receiving Aunt Abina's text, who was inclined toward believing Kwame because he was physically present while I was physically absent, who had been trained by our family's culture to avoid conflict and to see both sides of every dispute until she had heard from everyone involved, began to believe him again At 11:34 a.m., Kwame called Uncle Raymond. The call lasted 4 minutes, according to what Uncle Raymond would tell me later. Kwame explained that I had asked him to manage the house while I recovered, that I was now in post-op, that the anesthesia was affecting my judgment, that I was making calls to people and contradicting what I had asked him to do before the surgery. He said he was concerned about my well-being. He said he wanted to make sure the family did not make decisions based on my medicated state. He said he thought the wisest course of action was to wait until I was more alert, before anyone made any major decisions about the property. Uncle Raymond, who was 71 years old, and who had spent his career in finance, and who understood the importance of clear decision-making authority, told Kwame that he thought it was wise to wait. He told Kwame that he trusted his judgment. He told Kwame that he would speak to Aunt Abina about taking a cautious approach until I was fully recovered, which was exactly what Kwame wanted him to say. For 90 minutes, while I lay in the recovery bay with monitors tracking my heart rate and my blood pressure and my oxygen saturation, Kwame ran a phone campaign from inside my house. He called Aunt Abina twice more. He texted Cousin Theo. He positioned himself as the rational adult, the one thinking clearly, the one making sound decisions, the one acting in my best interest, even as I worked against it. He made himself the voice of reason, and he made me the confused patient, the woman whose medication had compromised her judgment, the person whose word could not be trusted because her mind was not yet her own. And it was working. Jerome came to check my vitals at 12:05 p.m. He looked at the monitor. He wrote down the numbers. He asked me how I was feeling. I told him I felt tired. He said that was normal. He said the anesthesia would take several more hours to fully leave my system. He said I should rest. He did not ask why I was making phone calls, or why my face was so controlled, or why I kept looking at my phone, even though I was supposed to be sleeping. At 12:18 p.m., Aunt Abena called me back. Renata, sweetie, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, and I've also been thinking about what Kwame said. I think maybe you're still a little foggy from the anesthesia. You know how it works. It takes time for your mind to clear completely. Kwame explained that he was helping you manage the property while you recovered. I think the best thing for you right now is to rest. Let Kwame handle the details for now. You don't need to worry about the house. That's what family is for. My chest went very still, not cold. Still, the kind of still that comes from knowing something that no one else in the room understands yet. Because I knew exactly what was in Patricia Hargrove's safe, I knew it was the original deed, signed and witnessed, placed there at 9:05 a.m. on a day that was now already in the past. I knew what time the county had logged the filing. 7:42 a.m., time-stamped, official, impossible to undo or deny. I knew what the email from Patricia Hargrove contained, even though Aunt Abena had not yet received it. I knew that the conversation I was currently having was already over. Kwame just did not know it yet. "Auntie," I said, and my voice was flat, which was partly the anesthesia and partly something else. Partly the knowledge that I did not need to convince her of anything, because the documents would do that for me. "Did you receive an email from Patricia Hargrove yet?" "No, not yet. Renata, I think you should really rest." "When it comes," I said. "Read it. All of it. Before you make any more decisions about the house." I hung up. What Aunt Abena did not understand, what none of them understood, what Kwame most certainly did not understand, was that his entire strategy rested on a single assumption, that I had done nothing before the anesthesia took hold. His entire case depended on me being the confused patient, the medicated woman whose judgment was impaired, the person who could be safely ignored because her mental state was compromised. But I had acted at 7:42 a.m., when my mind was clear and my signature was legally valid and my intent was unambiguous. I had acted at 9:05 a.m., when I had placed the original deed in a lawyer's safe deposit box with a witness present and a timestamp recorded. Those actions were not the product of anesthesia-induced confusion. Those actions were the product of preparation. Kwame was right about one thing. The person in the recovery bay, the person currently lying in a hospital gown with an IV line running into her hand, the person listening to her family suggest that she rest and let her brother handle everything, was not entirely herself. The anesthesia was still working through my system. My thinking was slower. My responses were flatter. I could not stand without holding the rail. I could not drive. I could not go home and physically confront him. But the woman who had woken up at 5:45 a.m. that morning and had sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and had filed a notice of sole ownership with Fulton County and had delivered the original deed to a lawyer's office. That woman was entirely herself. That woman had been thinking clearly. That woman had known exactly what she was doing and why. That woman had understood that her brother would move fast, that he would lie, that he would try to use her incapacity against her, and that woman had made sure he could not. He did not know the difference between those two women. He thought they were the same person, and that the medicated version in the recovery bay was the one he was currently convincing. The one he was currently moving around like a chess piece on a board he thought he controlled. He did not understand that the prepared version had already moved first. The document that was already filed. Patricia Hargrove sent the cease and desist at 2:47 p.m. on May 15th, 2026. The email was sent simultaneously to 5 recipients. Hiya, Kwame Ernest Osei, Aunt Abena Osei, Theodore Osei, Raymond Osei, and Crestwood Residential Property Management. The subject line read, Notice of Cease and Desist. Unauthorized representation of ownership. 114 Briarwood Court Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia 30318. The letter opened without preamble. On behalf of Renata Adwoa Osei, the sole and documented owner of record of the property located at 114 Briarwood Court Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia 30318. I am writing to formally notify you that any representation of ownership, management authority, rental authority, or control over said property by Kwame Ernest Osei is unauthorized, false, and constitutes violations of property rights under Georgia law O-SOI-G-A, Section 34-6-2 O-C-G-A, Section 44-7-1, and applicable common law doctrines of conversion and trespass. It was 4 pages long. The letterhead read Patricia Hargrove and Associates, Real Estate Law, with an Atlanta address. The date was May 15th, 2026. The case reference number was CR-202-6-47821. the exact same case number that Kwame had used when he contacted Crestwood Residential 4 days earlier. The case number he had assigned to the property when he falsely claimed to be its owner. The first exhibit attached to the letter was a certified copy of the Notice of Sole Ownership filed with Fulton County Records. Oh, the filing date and time were printed in bold. 7:42 a.m. May 15th, 2026. The case number was official. The county seal was official. The recording number was official. The document had been submitted electronically at that exact time, received by the county clerk's office, processed, stamped, and entered into the permanent record of Fulton County property transactions. There was no ambiguity about the time. There was no room for interpretation. At 7:42 a.m. that morning, 4 hours and 48 minutes before Kwame let himself into my house with a key he had copied. 4 hours and 20 minutes before he called Aunt Abina with his story about Mama's final wishes. 4 hours before he met Darius at the front door. The Notice of Sole Ownership had been official record. The second exhibit was the original intake log from Patricia Hargrove's office safe deposit system. The entry was handwritten in neat block letters. Renata Adwoa Ozai, original deed, property at 114 Briarwood Court Northwest. Atlanta, Georgia 30318, surrendered for safekeeping and legal protection. Received 9:05 a.m., May 15th, 2026. Witnessed by Margaret Chen, office manager. Status: locked safe deposit box. Patricia Hargrove and associates. Margaret Chen's signature was on the document. The time was documented in Patricia's office manager's own handwriting. The deed had been received, logged, witnessed, and secured before I had even completed pre-op paperwork at the surgical center. Before the anesthesiologist had checked my IV line. Before I had been asked to count backward from 100. The third exhibit was a certified copy of the original deed itself, printed from the Fulton County Recording Office. The pages showed property address, 114 Briarwood Court Northwest. Year, Atlanta. Georgia, 30318. Purchase price, $214,000. Method of payment, cash, paid in full. Mortgage status, none. Sole owner of record, Renata Adwoa Osei. Date of purchase and recording, May 19th, 2020. The document was sealed with an official county seal. Every word was authentic. Every number was documented. Every signature was legal. The cease and desist continued. Ms. Osei has taken appropriate legal measures to protect her property from unauthorized access, misrepresentation, and fraudulent claims of ownership. Any continued presence at 114 Briarwood Court Northwest by Kwame Ernest Osei without explicit written permission from Ms. Osei. Any continued representation to third parties that Mr. Osei has ownership authority, management authority, or rental authority over said property, or any attempt to execute agreements regarding said property on behalf of Mr. Osei constitutes unlawful interference with a property of sole and documented record, and will be treated accordingly under applicable law. It then listed the specific violations: trespass, conversion, unjust enrichment, fraudulent misrepresentation, tortious interference with property rights. The letter concluded, Ms. Osei reserves all rights to pursue legal remedies, including but not limited to civil suit for damages, restitution, punitive damages, injunctive relief, and referral to law enforcement for investigation of potential criminal conduct. This notice constitutes formal demand for cessation of all unauthorized activity regarding the subject property. Effective immediately. The 14-day response period shall commence upon receipt of this notice via certified email and certified mail. Failure to comply with this cease and desist notice within said 14-day period will result in escalation of this matter to law enforcement and the filing of appropriate civil and/or criminal charges. It was signed by Patricia Hargrove, attorney at law with her bar number and state of licensure listed below. At 3:15 p.m., Kwame received his copy. I will never know what his face looked like when he read it. I will never know if he sat down or remained standing. I will never know if he read it once and understood immediately, or if he read it multiple times, each time hoping that the meaning would change, that the timestamps would somehow shift, that the documents would reveal themselves to be something other than what they were. What I know is that the foundation he had spent the entire morning constructing, the foundation of my incapacity, my confusion, my unreliability, had been undone before he ever began. At 4:28 p.m., Crestwood Residential sent a response email to Patricia Hargrove. The subject line read, RE, Notice of Cease and Desist, listing CR-2026-47821 account status. The body of the email was brief and professional. Upon receipt of your cease and desist notice and review of attached documentation, Crestwood Residential has immediately removed Kwame Ernest Osei from our system and terminated all associated listings. Effective immediately. The property at 114 Briarwood Court Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia 30318, has been delisted and removed from all active inventory and prospective tenant communications. The prospective tenant has been notified that the showing is cancelled and the listing is unavailable. We regret any misrepresentation of ownership and thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Crestwood Residential understood something that Kwame had not. They understood that the moment a property management company receives certified notice that the person claiming to represent a property does not actually own it, they have liability exposure. They understood that continuing to work with Kwame would make them complicit in fraud. They understood that the only rational response was immediate cessation of all business with him. At 4:31 p.m., Darius received a voicemail from Crestwood Residential. Hello, this is Crestwood Residential calling regarding your application for the property at 114 Briarwood Court Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia. We regret to inform you that the listing has been cancelled and is no longer available for rental. We apologize for any inconvenience and any confusion regarding your application. If you have further questions, please contact our office. The any confusion was a corporate understatement for the person who showed you this property did not own it, and we should have verified that before allowing the showing. Aunt Abina received her copy of the cease and desist at 3:42 p.m. She opened the email in her kitchen, the same kitchen where Kwame had sat at her table hundreds of times, where he had slept on her couch during his homeless years, where he had invoked Mama's name and asked for food and shelter and money. She read the first page. Then she clicked on the first exhibit and saw the timestamp, 7:42 a.m. Then she clicked on the second exhibit and saw Margaret Chen's signature and the time, 9:05 a.m. Then she read the deed and saw $214,000. Paid in full, sole owner, Renata. And in the silence of her kitchen, Aunt Abina understood that she had been lured to. That the man she had been inclined to believe the man who had invoked her sister's memory as a tool, had known he was lying the entire time. Uncle Raymond received his copy at 3:47 p.m. He opened it in his office, where he managed accounts and understood the difference between what things appeared to be and what they legally were. He read the filing timestamp. He understood immediately. He had been wrong to defer to Kwame. He had been manipulated by the invocation of incapacity. Cousin Theo received his at 3:54 p.m. and he called Aunt Abina within minutes. Did you get the letter? Did you read the exhibits? At 3:22 p.m., while Aunt Abina was still processing the documents, while Uncle Raymond was still reading, while the weight of the cease and desist was still settling into the minds of everyone who had received it, Patricia Hargrove called me in the recovery bay. "He received it," she said. "The email bounced back as delivered, read at 3:16 p.m., and I've already heard from Crestwood. They've removed him from their system entirely. The listing is cancelled. Darius got the cancellation call. They're calling it a day." I lay back against the pillow. Jerome had brought crackers and apple juice to the tray table. The crackers were saltines in a plastic sleeve. The apple juice was in a small translucent cup with a plastic lid and a flexible straw. I had not eaten anything yet. The anesthesia was still working through my system, and my stomach was still recovering. "There's a key passage I want you to hear," Patricia said. She did not read from the letter. She had it in front of her, but she knew the important parts by heart. She had written them. "Listen. Any continued presence at or representation of ownership over the property at 114 Briarwood Court, Northwest. Atlanta, Georgia 30318 by Kwame Ernest Osei or any party acting on his instruction constitutes unlawful interference with a property of sole and documented record and will be treated accordingly." I listened with my eyes closed. The words were plain. They were legal. They were absolute. They said what needed to be said. They did not need elaboration or explanation. The meaning was clear to anyone who read them. The notice of sole ownership was filed at 7:42 a.m., Patricia continued. "That was 4 hours and 48 minutes before your anesthesia began. 4 hours and 20 minutes before he called Aunt Abena. It was filed while you were sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee. It was filed while your mind was clear and your thinking was sound and your signature was legal. If Kwame or anyone else tries to argue that you were confused or medicated or not of sound mind when you authorized that filing, they can't. The timestamp proves otherwise. The timestamp proves you were thinking clearly. The timestamp proves you acted with full legal capacity and intent. The timestamp proves that everything he spent the last 90 minutes telling your family, that you were confused, that your judgment was compromised, that they should not listen to you, is not only false, it's chronologically impossible. I opened my eyes. The ceiling tiles above the bed had small holes in them, arranged in a regular grid. A pattern. A system. He spent from 11:23 a.m. to 12:50 p.m. telling your family that you were not yourself. Patricia said, he spent 90 minutes arguing that they should defer to him because the anesthesia had rendered your judgment unreliable. He built his entire case on the foundation of your incapacity. But you were not incapacitated when it mattered. You were not incapacitated at 7:42 a.m. You acted 4 hours and 48 minutes before the anesthesia took hold, and he had no idea. I reached for the apple juice and drank it slowly through the plastic straw. The juice was cold and sweet and slightly artificial tasting. The kind of juice served in hospitals because it was easy on recovering stomachs and difficult to spill. What Kwame had fundamentally misunderstood, what he could not have understood, because I had not told him, was the difference between the two women he was dealing with. There was the woman lying in a hospital bed in a surgical gown, the one recovering from anesthesia, the one who could not stand without holding a rail, the one he was calling confused and medicated. And there was the woman who had woken up at 5:45 a.m., who had sat at her kitchen table before dawn, who had filed a notice of sole ownership at 7:42 a.m., who had delivered a deed to a lawyer's safe at 9:05 a.m. They looked similar. They sounded like the same person, but one of them had already acted, and one of them was now dealing with the consequences of that preparation. He had built his entire argument on the assumption that I was helpless. He had told Aunt Abina that I was confused. He had told Uncle Raymond that my judgment was compromised. He had told Crestwood Residential that he owned the property. He had told Darius that the room would be available within 2 weeks. He had shaken Darius's hand on the front porch, as if the deal was done, as if the next 2 weeks would proceed according to the plan he had outlined. And he had made one catastrophic error. He had assumed that the woman recovering from surgery was the only woman in this story. He had not understood that there had been another woman, hours earlier, who had known exactly what he was planning and had ensured he could not carry it out. He had a key. He had a story. He had a prospective tenant. He had a phone campaign running against me. He had Aunt Abina wavering at 12:18 p.m. He had Uncle Raymond cautious. He had the physical advantage of being in the house while I was in a hospital bed. But he did not have the deed. He did not have the filing. He did not have the timestamp that proved I had acted before the anesthesia. That proved I had been thinking clearly. That proved the entire foundation of his claim, that I was medicated and confused and therefore unreliable, was not only false, but demonstrably, chronologically impossible. He built his whole case on the idea that I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to act. He didn't know I had already acted. That's not a logistics problem. That's a sequencing problem. And I got to the sequence first. The cease and desist goes out. Crestwood Residential removed Kwame from their system at 4:28 p.m. Not because they were moved by sympathy or justice, but because they understood liability exposure with the clarity of a company that had insurance obligations, and legal exposure to manage a property management company that continues to facilitate transactions with someone after receiving certified notice that the person does not own what he claims to represent, is a company choosing to expose itself to litigation from multiple directions. From the actual owner, from prospective tenants who discover they have been defrauded, from the state's real estate licensing board. What Crestwood Residential grasped immediately, what Kwame would never fully understand, was that once Patricia Hargrove's cease and desist landed in their inbox with exhibits attached, every additional moment they spent associating with him became a moment they were actively choosing to expose themselves to legal action. They sent Patricia an email at 4:28 p.m. Upon receipt of your cease and desist notice dated May 15th, 2026, and review of the submitted documentation, Crestwood Residential has immediately removed Kwame Ernest Osei from our agent database and terminated all associated listings, effective immediately. The property at 114 Briarwood Court Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia 30318, has been delisted and removed from active inventory. The prospective tenant identified in connection with this listing has been notified of the cancellation. We regret any misrepresentation of ownership and appreciate your prompt notification. At 4:31 p.m., Darius received a voicemail from a Crestwood residential representative. His name was read off a form. The message was cordial, but final. "Hello, this is Crestwood Residential calling regarding your inquiry about the property at 114 Briarwood Court Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia. We regret to inform you that the listing has been cancelled and is no longer available for consideration. We apologize for any inconvenience or confusion regarding your inquiry. If you have any questions, please contact our office." What Darius did not know, what he would never be told explicitly, was how close he had come. He had nearly rented a bedroom in a house he did not own from a man who had no legal authority to rent anything, based on a conversation with a person who had deliberately lied about his ownership status. He had been minutes away from signing a lease that would have been invalid, from moving his belongings into a space Kwame could not legally control, from becoming entangled in a fraud he had not participated in but would have been a victim of. Kwame called my cell phone at 3:47 p.m. The phone was in the recovery bay with me, but I was resting, and I did not answer. The call went to voicemail. He called again at 4:12 p.m. I still did not answer. He called a third time at 4:38 p.m. By then, I had received Patricia's call about the cease and desist, and I knew what was coming. The first voicemail arrived at 3:52 p.m. His voice came through with a slight digital delay, but the tone was clear. Hurt. Wounded. The tone of someone who believed he had been wronged and could not understand why. "Renata, it's me. I was only trying to help you while you recovered. I was trying to manage the house so you wouldn't have to worry about anything while you're healing. I don't understand why you're doing this, why you're making this into something official, something legal. This should be a family matter. Family handles things without lawyers involved. I was trying to be helpful, and now I'm the bad guy because of some letter from an attorney. Call me back, please. We need to talk about this before it gets worse. I don't want this to be a legal situation. Let's just talk, please." The second voicemail, left at 4:39 p.m., was shorter, 42 seconds. His voice had changed entirely. The wounded tone was gone. What remained was flat, precise, angry in the way that anger becomes when it stops being emotional and starts being purposeful. "You're going to regret making this official. You're going to regret putting lawyers between us and turning family business into a legal matter. This is the kind of thing that families work out together. You didn't have to do this. You could have just asked me to stop, but instead you went straight to a lawyer. You're going to regret it." I saved both voicemails. I did not listen to them again immediately. I was still in the recovery bay, still in the surgical gown, still with the IV line in the back of my left hand. I had the phone in my hand, but I did not call him back. I did not send a response. I simply saved both files to my voicemail archive and waited for the discharge process to complete. At 2:15 p.m., I was cleared to leave. The surgical team had done their final checks. The site was healing correctly. The anesthesia had mostly cleared my system. I could stand without holding a rail, though I was unsteady on my feet. I could walk short distances. I could sit upright in a car without pain medication. I was cleared to go home. Loz was waiting in the lobby. She had anticipated that putting on the clothes I had worn to surgery, the button-up shirt and comfortable pants, might be uncomfortable over the surgical incisions. She had brought sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt from my house, which she had let herself into to retrieve, using the spare key I had given her years ago. She had also brought a pillow from my bed, understanding that I would want something familiar on the drive home. She was not leaving anything to chance. We drove from Northside Surgical Centre back toward 114 Briarwood Court in Luz's 2019 Honda CR-V with the cream interior and the slight squeak in the passenger door that she had been meaning to fix for 6 months. The drive took 35 minutes in the mid-afternoon traffic. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about the surgery itself, how long the procedure had taken, whether the surgeon had found anything unexpected, how the healing was progressing. I told her what I had been told in the discharge instructions. Everything had gone according to plan. No complications, no surprises. The incisions were clean. Healing was on schedule. I would be sore for a week or two. But there was no medical reason to expect problems. At the 20-minute mark, as we were passing through the tree-lined neighbourhoods that bordered the approach to Briarwood Court, the kind of streets where families had lived for decades, where houses were paid off and generational, where the idea of a sibling trying to claim ownership of another sibling's property would have seemed not just wrong, but incomprehensible. I asked Luce to play the second voicemail on speaker. She navigated to my phone without taking her eyes off the road. She found the voicemail from Kwame at 4:39 p.m. She pressed play. His voice came through the car speakers, flat and cold and final. "You're going to regret making this official. You're going to regret putting lawyers between us and turning family business into a legal matter. This is the kind of thing that families work out together. You didn't have to do this. You could have just asked me to stop, but instead you went straight to a lawyer. You're going to regret it." The voicemail ended. The car was very quiet. We were stopped at a traffic light. The afternoon light was coming through the trees in scattered patches, and the car felt very still. Luce said nothing for a long moment. Then, without looking at me, without any inflection in her voice, "He really said that." It was not a question. It was a statement of disbelief. She had heard the words herself, coming through the speakers of her car, but she was still processing the fact that he had actually said them, that he had recorded them, that he had left them on my voicemail. "He really said that," I said. I opened my phone. I forwarded both voicemails, the wounded justification and the threat, to Patricia Hargrove's email with a single line of text. "For the record." We drove the remaining 15 minutes to my house in silence. When we pulled into the driveway of 114 Briarwood Court, I could see immediately that Kwame's car was gone. He had left at some point in the last 4 hours. After receiving the cease and desist, after understanding what it meant, after making the 3 phone calls and leaving the 2 voicemails, he had understood, finally, that his position in the house was no longer tenable. that the documents Patricia had sent had made his claim impossible to sustain. That continuing to fight would only create a larger record of his own wrongdoing. I did not feel triumphant. I did not experience the satisfaction of having won something. What I felt instead was the particular exhaustion that comes from having been correct about something you desperately wish you had been wrong about. I had known he would move fast. I had known the anesthesia would give him a window he thought was safe. I had known he would invoke Mama and try to convince the family that my judgment was impaired by medication. I had known all of these things, not because I was cynical, but because I had watched him operate for 4 years, and I had learned his patterns. I had known what he would do, and I had prepared for it. And in preparing for it, I had been right in every particular. There was no joy in that correctness. There was only the weight of having anticipated someone's betrayal so completely that you have to act before they even make the move, and then carry the knowledge that you were right about them all along. The family sees everything. I was home by 5:30 p.m. Luz had driven me from Northside Surgical Centre directly to 114 Briarwood Court. Taking the back roads to avoid traffic, keeping the car steady on turns so that the movement would not jar my surgical site. When we arrived, she had helped me from the passenger seat to the couch in the living room with the care of someone who had helped people through recoveries before. She had positioned the heating pad that was already warming over my incision site, had adjusted the throw pillows so I could recline without putting pressure on the areas where the surgeon had made the laparoscopic cuts. Then she had gone into the kitchen and had begun making soup, chicken and rice, the kind that takes an hour to simmer properly, the kind that fills a house with something like comfort, or at least with the memory of comfort. At 6:02 p.m., my phone rang. It was Aunt Abina. Her voice was different than it had been at 12:18 p.m., when she had called me in the recovery bay and had gently suggested that I rest and let Kwame handle the details of the house. This voice was steady, decided, the voice of someone who had read something that had changed her understanding. Renata, I have read the documents, all of them, the filing with Fulton County, the deed intake log from Patricia's office, the certified copy of the original deed. I understand what happened. I did not speak, she continued. I understand that you acted before the surgery. I understand that the filing was made at 7:42 a.m., before Kwame ever arrived at the house. I understand that you protected yourself deliberately. I am going to the house now. Kwame needs to leave. He should not have been there, and he should not be there now. Thank you, Auntie, I said. I am sorry I did not understand this morning. I should have trusted you when you told me. I should have asked more questions before I suggested you Glatien. Thank you, Auntie, I said again. She said she would call me after she had spoken to Kwame. She hung up. The call had lasted less than a minute. I did not say, I told you so. I did not say, I tried to explain this morning and you didn't believe me. I did not say, you were ready to take his word over mine because he was standing in my house, and I was lying in a hospital bed with an IV line in my hand. I did not extract any acknowledgement of her earlier doubt or her initial wavering, because I understood something she was only now learning. Certainty only comes from documents, not from words. What I understood was that her shift in position from uncertain to decided from deferring to Kwame to standing against him, was only possible because there was now a document to point to, a filing with an official timestamp, a deed in a lawyer's safe with a witness's signature, a certified copy showing $214,000 paid in full. These were not feelings. These were not interpretations. These were facts that could not be argued with or reframed or understood differently depending on who was telling the story. Her doubt this morning had not been cruelty. It had been the ordinary uncertainty of someone caught between two conflicting narratives and not knowing which one was true. The documents had resolved that uncertainty. Now she needed to act, and my role was not to make her feel worse about having wavered. My role was to allow her to do what was right without needing to apologize for having questioned me. "Thank you, Auntie," was all that was necessary. At 6:47 p.m., Luz was standing at her kitchen window, the window that faced my property, when Aunt Abena's 2018 Honda Accord pulled into the driveway of 114 Briarwood Court. Luz had positioned herself there deliberately, understanding without my asking that she should bear witness to what happened next. Aunt Abena got out of the car. She walked to the front door. She did not knock. She used the key I'd given her years ago. The one she had kept in her purse for emergencies. The one that I'd authorized her to have. What happened inside the house in the next 23 minutes, I do not know. I did not ask Aunt Abena later what she said to Kwame. And she did not volunteer the information. I do not know whether he argued with her or whether he simply understood, looking at the documents she presumably showed him, that the moment had passed. I do not know whether he claimed that he had been trying to help, or whether he admitted that he had been trying to take something that was not his. I do not know what words were exchanged, or what acknowledgement was made between them. What I know, because Luz texted me from her window, is that at 7:10 p.m., Kwame's 2015 Nissan Altima pulled out of my driveway. The car turned left on Briarwood Court and drove away in the direction of the highway. Luz's text was simple. "He's gone." I did not respond to her message. I was lying on my couch with the heating pad warming the area around my surgical site, listening to the sound of Luz's soup simmering on the stove in the kitchen. The small bubbling sounds of chicken broth coming slowly to a boil. The occasional clink of a spoon against the pot as she stirred. And I was not thinking about Kwame or where he was going or what explanation he would construct for other people about what had happened. The next morning, I woke in my own bed in my own house. The pain from the surgical site was present but manageable. The incisions were tender but healing. I could move slowly, carefully, with deliberation, without sharp pain. Lust had stayed through the night, sleeping in my guest room, positioned to help if I needed assistance during the dark hours. When I woke, she was already in the kitchen, and the smell of fresh coffee was moving through the house. I walked through 114 Briarwood Court slowly. The back bedroom door was still locked. The deadbolt I had installed in February was still in place. The key was still on my keyring, exactly where it had always been. Kwame had never gotten inside. No unauthorized person had entered that room. The locked door had held. The house was quiet. Not the absence of sound kind of quiet, but the kind of quiet that means a place is entirely yours again. That means no one is claiming it. That means the person who paid for it with her own labor and signed the documents with her own signature and holds the deed with her own name is the person who gets to decide what happens inside it and who gets to be there. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the refrigerator, where Luce had left the soup in a glass container with a note taped to the top, with instructions for reheating. I felt something that was not triumph and was not satisfaction, but was something closer to the particular relief of having acted before the crisis fully arrived, of having prepared before the emergency began, of having said no to someone before they had fully begun to take what was not theirs to take. The house was mine. It had always been mine. And now everyone knew it. What remains? Kwame did not respond within the 14-day window. The deadline passed on May 29th. Patricia Hargrove logged his non-response in her file, dating the entry and noting the absence of any communication from him or anyone acting on his behalf. Non-response was itself a form of response. It was an acknowledgement that the cease and desist had landed, had been understood, and had not been contested. People who believed they had a legitimate claim responded. People who knew they did not have a claim remained silent. The $8,200 loan was not pursued. I made a deliberate decision to let it go, not as a retroactive gift to Kwame, not as an act of family generosity that I had belatedly decided to execute, but as a final accounting. I had written him a check in 2023. He had not repaid it. That transaction was complete. Asking for the money back would extend the relationship into another negotiation, another conversation, another moment where he would have an opportunity to explain himself, or to request more time, or to invoke Mama's voice one last time in the hopes that it would move me. I did not want the money back. I wanted to be done with the transaction entirely. The money was the price I had paid to learn what I needed to know about him. I would not ask to be refunded. Cousin Theo called me on June 2nd. He did not know what he wanted to say. He said he had read the documents, all of them. He said he understood what had happened. He said he was sorry he had initially believed Kwame's version. He called again on June 5th with essentially the same message, as if repetition would deepen the sincerity or repair something that was already beyond repair. I returned the second call and kept it short. I told him thank you for understanding. I told him I appreciated him. I did not need him to apologize on Kwame's behalf, or to construct an explanation for why he had initially wavered. I closed the conversation. He did not call again. Uncle Raymond sent a text on June 3rd. I see what happened. I'm sorry. I responded, thank you, Uncle. That was the entirety of our communication about it. He did not call. He did not try to extend the conversation into something more substantial. He had said what needed to be said, and we both moved forward from that point. I did not speak to Kwame again. Not in the weeks that followed. Not in the months after. He did not call me. He did not send a message. He did not attempt contact of any kind. The cease and desist had been explicit in its terms, and his non-response had been his acceptance of those terms. What I want to tell you about documentation, I used to think the word was cold, clinical, something that lawyers used when they had already given up on human connection, when they had decided that a relationship was beyond saving and only the record mattered anymore. But I was wrong about that. Documentation is not the death of relationship. Documentation is the only thing that keeps a relationship honest when one person has decided to be dishonest. Documentation is memory with a timestamp. It is the thing you build when you already know someone is going to try to rewrite what happened. You build it before they start rewriting. So the record exists before the argument does. You place it somewhere safe, in a lawyer's office, in county records, in your own carefully kept files, and you make sure that when the person inevitably says, "That's not what happened," you can point to the date and time and the official seal and say, "Yes, it was. I have the proof." Kwame thought the house was unguarded because I was in a hospital bed. He thought I was helpless. He thought that a woman recovering from surgery, medicated and incapacitated by anesthesia, was someone he could move around like a chess piece on a board he controlled. He did not understand what I should have said plainly years ago, what I should have named clearly, instead of allowing it to be buried under family obligation. I am never unguarded. I just don't always let people see where the guard is standing. 2 weeks after my discharge, I scheduled my first post-surgical property appraisal. I was not yet fully healed. The surgical site was still tender, and I tired easily. But the work was light. Mostly sitting, mostly paperwork, mostly the kind of work I could do from home or from a car. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had filed the notice of sole ownership at 7:42 a.m. on May 15th. And I opened my work email, and I scheduled an appointment for a residential property in Decatur. The appointment was for June 30th. The property was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house built in 1987. The owners were a couple named Marcus and Diane, who had purchased it 5 years earlier and who wanted an updated appraisal for refinancing purposes. I confirmed the appointment. I printed out the intake form. I began preparing the checklist of things I would need to examine during the appraisal. The foundation, the structural integrity, the roof condition, the market comparables for the neighborhood. I was returning to work. I was returning to the things I knew how to do. The things that had nothing to do with family drama or legal threats, or the question of whether someone I had raised like family would try to claim what I owned. I want to say something directly to you because you have spent this time with me. If someone in your life is positioning themselves to take something from you, whether it is property or time or money or access or control, watch what they do when they think there is nothing stopping them. Watch how fast they move. Watch how they construct their story. Watch how they invoke the people you love in order to bypass you. That is who they are. That is what they actually believe they are entitled to. That is not a moment of weakness or a bad decision made under temporary stress. That is them, fully revealed. And if you see that revealed version of someone, if you recognize what they are capable of, do not wait for the moment when they think you are helpless. Prepare before the crisis. Document before the argument. Build the record before they try to rewrite it. Be the person standing in your own way, so that when they try to move you, they find out that you were never where they thought you were. The house at 114 Briarwood Court is still mine. The deed is still in Patricia Hargrove's safe. The filing is still in Fulton County records. The notice of sole ownership is still time-stamped at 7:42 a.m. on May 15th, 2026. Kwame never lived there. Darius never rented the back bedroom. Crestwood Residential never processed his application. And I am still here. Still the owner. Still the one who decides what happens inside these walls. If you've experienced something like this, if someone you trusted tried to claim what was yours, if you had to protect yourself from family, if you had to put a legal boundary between yourself and someone you once believed would never hurt you, drop your city in the comments. You are not alone in this. No, the pattern is recognizable. The move is predictable, and the countermove is available to anyone who is willing to act before the crisis arrives.